Tulsi Gabbard made history recently by, for the first time in the U.S. government setting, acknowledging the existence of the OPCW whistleblowers. This came when Arizona Senator Mark Kelly was trying to grill her for daring to question allegations that the former government of Syria, led by Bashar al-Assad, used chemical weapons. And she brought up the OPCW whistleblowers. And that was a very important moment. And you pointed this out also for the first time in the U.S. government setting. Somebody acknowledged the scandal that was the U.S. dirty war in Syria, in which the U.S. openly sided with an al-Qaeda-dominated insurgency. And Tulsi Gabbard gave a very searing response also to Mark Kelly about that, calling this out for the first time ever in a U.S. government setting, that this dirty war that entailed the U.S. siding with al-Qaeda was acknowledged. In her opening statement at the hearing, Tulsi Gabbard quoted that Jake Sullivan email that we always quote from February 2012 to Hillary Clinton: Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. That was the first time anyone has ever, I think, quoted that email in a U.S. government setting. And this is what Tulsi Gabbard said to Mark Kelly about her opposition to that dirty war.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Gabbard, when Russia was denying us use of chemical weapons, they accused the U.S. of supporting terrorists. This is a line that Putin used frequently during the Syrian civil war as he supported Assad. Syrian officials made similar comments. They did it repeatedly. They did it in public. They did it at the United Nations. In 2016, you gave an interview in which you said, and this is a quote, "The U.S. is providing direct and indirect support to terrorist groups in order to overthrow the Syrian government." And in 2019, on the Democratic presidential debate stage, you said of President Trump, this is a quote, "This current president is continuing to betray us. We were supposed to be going after al-Qaeda, but over years now, not only have we not gone after al-Qaeda, our president is supporting al-Qaeda." So I'm interested to hear, what was your goal in saying these things? And did you consider, before saying them, the motives of Iran and Russia, what their motives might have been before making these claims?
Senator, as someone who enlisted in the military specifically because of al-Qaeda's terrorist attack on 9/11 and committing myself and my life to doing what I could to defeat these terrorists, it was shocking and a betrayal to me and every person who was killed on 9/11, their families and my brothers and sisters in uniform. When, as a member of Congress, I learned about President Obama's dual programs that he had begun really to overthrow the regime of Syria, and being willing to, through the CIA's Timber Sycamore program that has now been made public, of working with and arming and equipping al-Qaeda in an effort to overthrow that regime, starting yet another regime change war in the Middle East. DoD train and equip program, again, begun under President Obama, is widely been known, looked at and studied, that ultimately resulted in over $500 million being used to train who they called moderate rebels, but were actually fighters working with and aligned with al-Qaeda's affiliate on the ground in Syria, all to move forward with their regime change and not acknowledging what was obvious at the time and what has unfortunately borne true, which was that a regime change war in Syria, much like the regime change wars in Iraq, the toppling of Gaddafi and Mubarak, while these are all dictators, would likely result in the rise of Islamist extremists like al-Qaeda taking power. I shed no tears for the fall of the Assad regime, but today we have an Islamist extremist who is now in charge of Syria, as I said, who danced on the streets to celebrate the 9/11 attack, who ruled over Idlib with an Islamist extremist governance, and who has already begun to persecute and kill and arrest religious minorities like Christians in Syria.
I understand.
Why that should be acceptable to anyone is beyond me.
It is
certainly not in our interest.
I appreciate your answer, and thank you. My concern has to do with the tendency to repeat Russian and Syrian, and even in some cases, I think we'll get into in the closed session, Iranian information, and to discount what comes from our intelligence community.
So that really captures it right there. Notice he can't challenge a single thing substantively that Tulsi Gabbard says about the reality of the dirty war in Syria, where the U.S. enabled an al-Qaeda-dominated insurgency that has now taken over Syria. He's only upset that it happens to coincide with Iranian, Chinese, Russian talking points, and therefore you're not allowed to say it out loud. Tulsi Gabbard did say it out loud, and that's why she's been hated, and there's so much to criticize her for. She smeared anti-genocide protesters. She's abandoned her previous statements on Israel-Palestine that were a lot more fair-minded. But But it's just a fact that she stands alone inside U.S. political circles to call it the dirty war in Syria. And that's why when she called it out in a congressional setting, Mark Kelly's only rebuttal is that he's mad that what she's saying happens to comport with what Russia and China and Iran also say.
Yeah, you're echoing Russian propaganda. Well, can it never be true? And is it only Russian propaganda because U.S. propagandists deny it? So he had nothing to say, but it was also just amazing for the American public to be introduced. Again, as I said before, there are so many teachable moments in the Trump era. And one of them is that the U.S. public was introduced, a national audience was introduced really for the first time to what I think was one of the greatest scandals in the 21st century. Like one of the crimes of the century was that billions of dollars were channeled into flooding Syria with weapons so that ISIS and Al-Qaeda could advance. And USAID was a big part of that. They created the civil administration in any area where Al-Qaeda and its allies, Al-Qaeda being Jabhat al-Nusra, which was controlled by the current Syrian president, self-appointed Syrian president, really a dictator, Mohammed Jolani, aka Ahmad al-Sharaa. USAID created his civil administration and helped give him credibility. They funded the White Helmets, the Syrian White Helmets, who made it, appear as though anywhere Nusra was attacking, people were just pure victims there, or chemical attacks were occurring. Media, Syrian quote unquote independent media funded by USAID would make it seem as though the so-called rebels who then controlled Idlib were running a really tight ship and a technocratic administration by promoting their good works. And here we are with regime change, proving the point we've been making and the point that Colonel Tulsi Gabbard has been making and was vilified for making when she was in Congress, which was that all of this U.S. money was going to lead to the founder of Syrian Al-Qaeda, the former deputy founder of ISIS, becoming president. It's really like such a shocking scandal, and nothing is said about it anymore. So whatever happens there, that was remarkable. I do think she'll be confirmed. Todd Young, the Indiana senator, is on the fence, has come around. I don't know what concessions she's making.
Well, she's, supported 702. She's, so walked back her views on mass surveillance. But look, she did not back off refusing to call Edward Snowden a traitor. She could have said, so many people like Michael Bennett demanded she call Edward Snowden a traitor. If she had done that, it would have made her path to confirmation a lot easier. She refused to do that. She declined. She should have told them a more direct answer. She avoided the question, which I thought was a mistake. She could have said, well, listen, Edward Snowden hasn't been charged with treason. If you think she's a traitor, then ask the U.S. government to charge him with being a traitor, which neither the first Trump administration or the Obama administration or the Biden administration ever did. So no one's ever charged him with treason. So why? I'm supposed to be an intelligence official. I'm not a court. I'm not the DOJ. So take it up with them. But she instead avoided the question. But to her credit, she didn't cater to their demand.
Yeah, I was impressed. I was impressed that because Snowden himself said, "Go ahead and call me a traitor. Just get in there." Yeah,
she didn't, and she didn't back down on. She also could have sold out the OPCW whistleblowers, but she actually invoked them and said they raised important questions and they deserve to be heard. And that's so important in a U.S. government that has silenced the OPCW whistleblowers to the point where they're never ever acknowledged, both by the U.S. government and corporate media, which refuses to acknowledge their existence. So Tulsi Gabbard even mentioning their existence was a huge slap in the face to this Orwellian oath of silence on the OPCW whistleblowers, because what they exposed with the cover-up of their investigation in Duma was so important and is so fundamental to the U.S. narrative that justifies war and sanctions on Syria.